All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to our Knowledge at Noon program. My name is Jenna Harris and I'm the Education Manager for YOLO Arts in the Gibson House and Property in Woodland, California. Just a reminder to everyone joining us today, please go ahead and mute your microphone and your video. This way we can preserve our bandwidth and make sure that we have a smooth streaming experience for everyone joining us. For those of us who are new to the program, Knowledge at Noon is a free monthly speaker series featuring artists, historians, and agriculture professionals that explore themes central to YOLO Arts and YOLO County Historical Collection exhibitions at the Gibson House and Property. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping announcements. Coming up, or still on view, is the lighter side humor and photography. That's on view here in Woodland at the Barn Gallery. The gallery is open on Thursdays from 2:30 to 5 p.m. and we will be open on Saturday, February 13th from 12:30 to 3 p.m. So come on by for a nice Valentine's weekend treat. Coming up, we do have a virtual tour and talk with Margaret Eldred on her gallery's 625 exhibition, The Good Earth, Farms and Fields from California to Cape Town. That's going to be taking place on Monday the 15th at noon on both our Facebook and Instagram channels. If you don't follow us already, please make sure to do so. Our handle is at YOLOArtsCA. And finally, the Gibson House is now open every Thursday from 2:30 to 5 p.m. So stop by to see the latest installations of the YOLO County Historical Collection. Next, I'd like to introduce my partner for today's event, the curator of the Barn Gallery, Janice Purnell, to introduce today's topic.
Thank you, Jenna. Hi, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I just want to, I think it's very appropriate at this point to wish happy 30th anniversary to Viewpoint Photographic Art Center in Sacramento. Rebecca is one of the beloved founding members. And so congratulations to you all. Such an accomplishment. You're such a driving force, keeping the art of photography alive and vital in our region. So we are just super honored to have collaborated with you on the current exhibit. Like Jenna said, humor and photography, the lighter side. We all need a laugh these days. It's an exhibit that's fun for all ages, and I really encourage you to come and see it. We feature the work of 19 distinguished portfolio members of Viewpoint. And I just want to do a quick shout out to David Kalb. He's a board member. He was instrumental in making this exhibit happen. And I thank you, David, as well as Carrot Koulis, who's the board president, for co-curating the exhibit as well. Like I said, it's fun, it's uplifting. Jenna told you the hours. And if you can't make it, we do have the entire show up online, and along with a fabulous 10-minute virtual tour given by Rebecca, where she offers her insights and comments on all of the work. And so it's really a fun watch. So again, that's on our website. So thank you so much for being here today, Rebecca. We really look forward to your talk. And we hope we can have many more collaborations with Viewpoint Gallery. Congratulations again. Thanks.
Thank you, Janice. At the end of today's talk, I will be hosting a moderated Q&A. So in order to submit your questions, please go ahead and do that using your chat feature. So that's going to be down at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a computer or if you're joining us by phone, you can click more and then chat. During the presentations, I will monitor questions as they come in and compile them to discuss with our speaker at the end of today. So without much further ado, I'd like to welcome Rebecca Gregg formally. Gregg is a charter member of Viewpoint Photographic Art Center in Sacramento and serves on its board of directors on the Curatorial Committee. She has facilitated print nights at Viewpoint for the last 15 years. Now emerita professor of photography, she taught photography and art and design for 35 years and over 10,000 students at Sierra College. 2 courses, History of Photography and Visual Communication, were among her favorites because of their relevancy to today's increasingly visual society. She is frequently called upon to critique and judge photographs, lecture, and be an art expert for the annual KVIE auction. Gregg continues her photographic interest in design and photographic representation through cityscapes, found and collected objects. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, nice to see you. Thanks for the introduction. It always is, where should you look? Down modestly or listen to that biography. Yeah. But today is about biography. So I want to tell you why I'm here and to let you know that I'm getting ready to go to a party, because tomorrow is William Henry Fox Talbot's birthday. And so we're going to look at his life today and his role in photography. I made that word up that you see on your screen that says visioneer, because he wasn't just a visionary, he actually did stuff, you know, and so he's sort of an engineer of this. And I'll try to keep it relatively light, although there is a sequence to this all happening. So we're going to look at William Henry Fox Talbot. And for some reason now my screen doesn't want to advance, and just before it was on that. So there we go. Okay, so the ingredients of photography were there for hundreds of years. That we had a camera obscura in 300. We had chemistry. We knew that silver darkened to light in 1725. We had optics since Galileo and before. So why is it that it took so long really for photography to be invented? Because the birthday of photography is disputable, but it's either 1826 or 1835 or 1839. So it's still a long ways away from when they had cameras. And I think the missing ingredient was the need and desire. And so part of what we're going to talk about today is the desire feature. And so here's William Henry Fox Talbot. And interestingly, the photograph that's there is Talbot photographed by the daguerreotype process. And Daguerre is his tremendous rival, as they both started the race kind of at the same time. He is an amateur scientist. That just means he loved science, but he didn't get paid for it. He was a member of the Royal Society of Science in London, and awarded many medals by them, two really important ones. And so what drives him is his curiosity, but that curiosity came from a lack of skill. He was as we might say, I can't draw for beans, I can't draw a straight line. That might be what Talbot would say. And he wouldn't have any idea that there were 40 other people who were trying to invent photography or overcome these limitations that they might find in themselves, because he is happily moving along in his life. We'll get to background about his life. So part of the photography connection starts in 1833. He's 33 years old. Makes it easy to keep track of Talbot because he's born in 1800. And that's where he gets the idea for photography. By 1835, he's realized the idea. He has made it happen. That's pretty phenomenal. And it partly means that he is educated and can understand the science of it, but that he also is driven. He has a desire to do this. And he has a relatively luxurious life in that he is not working in the coal mines. And so he can pursue these with his agile and curious and well-educated mind, can pursue his interest, and it combines art and science for him. So just 2 years, he realizes the first negative, and we'll take a look at it. But in 1839, his bubble burst because Louis Daguerre has beat him to the announcement of photography. And Louis Daguerre, in this wonderful quote, I just love the excitement of it. I have seized the light. I'm fond of saying we don't see light directly. We only see the evidence of it, whether it's on our faded curtains or our sunburn or the wonderful shadows of bare trees in winter. This is the first this is the first photograph of Daguerre. He hadn't even, as of yet, named it for himself. He's obviously following a genre that we well know of the still life, and it's 1837, 2 years before the announcement. He tries to publish and to announce it himself, but he can't generate interest in it. So it's not that society is begging for photography. Something else has got to happen. And this is just one more of Daguerre. We're not going to look deeply at Daguerre. This is supposedly the first photograph of a person. This guy's getting his shoes shined over here. And when Samuel F.B. Morris saw this image, he said that you can read in the fine details on the signs down the street. So this is again taken from his studio before the announcement to the world. Daguerre and Talbot might as well, without social media and the internet, might as well be worlds apart. So they don't have any knowledge of each other. Let's just summarize for a minute what's about Daguerre here. He's an artist, a very agile, wonderful artist, the inventor of the diorama. He's very curious. He has made but in a different kind of artful way. He's also a businessman. He has dioramas even in London. He gets the advantage first over Talbot because it's announced first. He gets government support. The daguerreotype is sharper and more detailed than Talbot's process. It's also limited in that it's fairly small. And actually, you have to view it at an angle. If you look straight on it, you're looking at a mirror. And in fact, it's often called the mirror with a memory. So what's its big disadvantage? It's one of a kind. There's no way to duplicate a daguerreotype except by copying it. And so that opens the door for what will later become the reason that Talbot's process is more meaningful to us in photography, because it allows us to make multiple prints. This is Talbots Estate. He isn't born here. And in fact, one of the sadnesses about Talbots life is that his father dies when he's only 5 months old. His mother, who's a major influence in his life, takes him to live with various family members for about 4 years, and then she remarries. This is Lecoq Abbey, which is just a short train ride outside of London. It was built in the 1200s. It was an abbey, and then it was part of the Talbot family. This is a modern picture of that same place, and you can see then that it has lasted over generations of caretaking. The sheep in the foreground also let you know in this image that this is a pastoral setting. And you might recognize this, the cloisters at Lecoq Abbey, from the Harry Potter movies or Pride and Prejudice. Even Downton Abbey did some filming here, and so we'll see the location of the cloisters. So can you imagine growing up here, as Fox Talbot did? Fox Talbot actually preferred to be called Henry. So young Henry comes here when he is 4 years old. Part of his burden in life is supporting this place. So when we see this from an aerial view, we might be able to appreciate a couple things. One, there's a village over here, Wilshire Village. At the time that Talbot lived here, it was 280 acres in the estate, and that included the village. So part of his responsibility and the family's responsibility was to caretake of the village and watch for their rights and well-being. This is that same tower. And here is the window, the famous oriel window, the bay window, that the first negative was ever made. When Talbot is trying to overcome his lack of drawing skill, he takes a camera Lucida with him, which has been around. He was 7 when it was invented, and you can see the tripod and the drawing. It's a drawing tool, and he's hoping that it can, because of the prism that's located here, when he takes it traveling, here's a modern day camera Lucida, he takes it to Lake Como. Before, he had traveled in Europe using a camera obscura, but that's bulkier to travel with. And so he's trying to lighten his load. Here he is at Lake Como, where George Clooney lives, and he uses the camera obscura to do this drawing. And he is so frustrated because it's very crude. It does have a sense of perspective in it, but look how quick and hasty it lays things out. And at the same time, his friend, John Herschel, and Herschel's wife, Margaret, does the coloring, has begun to produce these marvelous examples of using the camera Lucida. Camera means room, and Lucida means light. So it's the light room, a name that's come down to digital photography, as we know through Adobe. So compare that to to Talbot's drawing, and you can see why he was frustrated. I won't go to read all of this, but it's from the first book that he published called The Pencil of Nature. And I've highlighted this phrase, taking sketches. We would say making drawings or making sketches. We wouldn't say taking. That's a word that we use more with photography. And that interests me that that the mechanics of the Lucida made him use that word, I think. And then down here, the idea occurred to me. So I enlarged that over here, how charming it would be if it were possible to cause these natural images to imprint themselves durably and remain fixed upon the paper. Fixed is also a word that comes down to photography. So this is the idea he has. I want to be able to take home what I see, and I can't draw it and take it home. So in 2 years, this one is one that he makes hastily, more than 2 years away. It's 6 years away. But in 2 years, he does produce the first photogenic drawing. And that's what this technique is. We would, in modern times, call it a photogram. It was later reinvented again by Man Ray, and he named it after himself as a rayogram or rayograph. We also bring it down into photography now as a contact print, because the plant is placed in contact with the sensitized paper. The paper is sensitive because of salt and silver nitrate combining to make silver chloride, and then the silver chloride is brushed onto very fine paper. And it's a kind of process that is called printing out paper. And it was, look at this one. Isn't this just magnificent? The detail. And that's what impresses Talbot so much. He later says that no one would take the time to, no artist, would take the time to draw all these little intricate things, that it is this photogenic drawing that can give this to us. These were mostly hastily prepared around the time that Daguerre announcement had been made in Paris, and it's winter, not very much sunlight in London, but nonetheless, he hastily prepares these because he wants to show that his work has preempted and was discovered first over Daguerre's. One more of these, and this one is not done in the same method. This is done as a salted paper print, and that is the way the later things that will be printed by Talbot will be done, is the salted paper print. This is an example from the Kodak website, actually, of printing out paper. During the 50s, it was common that studio photographers would give you your samples to look at on printing out paper, and they weren't fixed. And so if you took them out of the envelope, very often they would fade and become darker. And this was Talbot's problem, that he had to have a way to stop the action of the light, even though it might be slowly progressing. This is a quote from the Encyclopedia Britannica. He was the first artist to be tutored by photography. So in seeing his own work, he in turn became its first artist. I think that that's a lot of what happens with digital photography today. People are learning the process very much more quickly because they can see immediate results and not have to wait and perhaps days till the film comes back, or even longer if they are traveling. This is a kind of complex thing. I'll try to narrow it down. This is one of his first cameras. Constance, his wife, named it, they were small, she named it only on one-time mousetrap, but it's such a funny little name that it stuck. This is the shutter. There's not a shutter built inside you, so you pull this up and the light goes in. It's quite small. And the camera, because its small weight, was so that the light could be more intense in there, the small size. And the lens is also a lens for a microscope. It has a very large lens opening. And still the exposures were long, because one of the characteristics of photogenic drawing was it was not very sensitive to light. And it took a very patient person. So what he would do, rather than be patient, he had several of these built. He would take them out on the grounds of Lecoq Abbey and have them go for a half hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on the day. And this is the first negative. It is known to the world. It is still in existence. It's only about the size of a postage stamp, 1 inch by 1.5, about 1 3/8. And it was made in 1935. That's the 2-year realization after the trip to Lake Como. There it is in a close-up. And he bragged that you could count the panes in the window. Bragged to himself. He was not a very boisterous, bragging person. In fact, he was a bit of an introvert. So this is Daguerre's that he presented. Actually, he didn't present, but Arago presented to the Science Academy in Paris. And the left-hand side is Talbot's, as you can already notice. You've already seen those. So if you were deciding whose process looked best, I think I might go with the one on the right. It has more detail. There just seems to be more sophistication. And that is indeed what happened, that Daguerre got a lifetime annuity. He gave his formulas to the world, and he was considered the inventor of photography. But actually, because of its one-of-a-kind nature, we really owe very much more to Talbot. Well, Talbot didn't give up. This is a calotype negative, and notice that it is the other announcement was in January. This is the following October, and he has made a calotype negative of his wife, Constance, inside the camera. It's not out of the camera, and it's not slow inside the camera. So, and I think it's also very artful, much more than typical studio poses. It's kind of a dramatic pose, like almost movie star-like. You notice how grainy and surfaced, how textured it looks. That's because the paper has texture, and that is indeed one of the drawbacks. Well, look at this. This is made around the same time period, and it's not very good. So I like to say that in some ways, I think Talbot knew that he wasn't ready for prime time with his photogenic drawing, that it was too slow, too unpredictable, and that he still had work to do. And that's why he went on to do the calotype process. Just quickly, though, let's look. These are all languages and choice of words from Talbot, except for one. He didn't use the word evidence, I did, but these were things he envisioned that photography could be used for. And I think if you pick any one of them, you'll see that we are inventorying our things for insurance, or even taking kind of first school day pictures. That's kind of memory inventory, So I think that he has realized all of these. This strange, wonderful object is the end of a plant. It's a plant stem through the solar microscope. So it's a tool of science and a tool of looking close study. And then he, of course, immediately realizes that the photographic art, that one of the qualities of photography will be that it sees in details, that it seems truthful, that it seems realistic. And actually, the truth and reality of photography has always been questionable, and is even more challenged today, you know, with the fake of everything, about whether this was ever true, but at least it can be true, faithful to the representation. And I think that is true, that was the use that Talbot saw to have of it. So in 1841, he patents. His mother urged him to do that, and so did David Brewster. He patented the calotype process. The patents never paid off for Talbot. He was a wonderful scientist, budding artist for sure, not a good businessman. We all have our flaws, and business commerce was not Talbot's realm. So the patents caused him so much trouble. He was constantly pursuing people to pay him money. They wouldn't. It made people think that he was stingy and selfish and not wanting to share. But the calotype process is believed by everyone, I think, to be the direct ancestor of modern photography. If we were to do the DNA, the positive things about it is that you can make multiple prints. He discovered that by changing the formula of the photogenic drawing, that he would have less time needed to make the exposure. The image would not be visible, so it couldn't be there to teach him what to do during the process. It would have to be developed. It still used high quality papers. He could make larger sizes because it didn't take so long to do them. Later, several people started waxing the paper and making sharper images. So what's the negative? The paper fibers make the image not very sharp. So here it is. That's our history right there. The paper negative and the paper positive. The paper positive is a salt print. And I almost prefer the paper negative in this particular image. I think it's quite beautiful. Notice how the corners are often clipped. They evidently, in handling and perhaps soaking, would get a different kind of look, and they were often not just to fit in an album, but they're often trimmed oddly. This is a trip to Paris he made. It's about the same time period, and it's done with a waxed negative. I hope you're impressed by it. It's still perhaps not as sharp as the daguerreotype, but it's a wonderful architectural study. And then using his own surroundings, he's photographing at Lecoq Abbey, out in the area that's next to the cloistered grounds. And then, you know, he's learned, he knows about art history. So this was made 75 years, a painting 75 years before he's born. He's well aware of it. And this is his calotype. It says it's a scene from a library in the title. It's his library. And of course, books are precious. It's not photographed in the library at all. So much for truth and reality. He has to take it outside in order to have as much light, but it is a facsimile of what exists on the inside. And isn't this a gorgeous image? Lord Nelson, of course, was the hero in the battles with France and Spain on the water, Admiral Lord Nelson. And I think one thing to point out here is the clarity and straightness of the image in terms of recognizable features. And it's just a wonderful architectural part. This blur here, I suspect, is a person, and this looks like a person's head and someone walking. Again, the exposure is so slow that a ghost can appear. The Hungerford Bridge was a pedestrian bridge over the Thames so that people could work on both sides. It didn't last very long. It was then replaced by trains, a train bridge. But what a wonderful photograph. And here his lines aren't quite so straight. His camera's tilted a little bit, so he has these converging lines. But I love this one in terms of the dark, dark light and the way this line of the mass points you in and connects here with the column. It's, to me, just masterful. Well, what else can Talbot do with this? He can print books. So he doesn't do, it would be depending on how you define it. It's not necessarily the first photographic book, because Anna Atkins did a book of and with several versions of cyanotypes that were totally made in contact, blueprints that were made in contact. These include this Pencil of Nature, which is the name of the book, includes the contact print or the photogenic drawing, but most of it is calotypes. And you can see that there were 6 parts and 24 prints, and each of them had to be glued in. That's what tipped in. The plates of the present work, he felt he had to tell people, are done by light alone, without any aid whatsoever from the artist's pencil. They are sun pictures. So this connection with light, and in fact, the name photography, you know, is light writing. The first commercially published book illustrated with photographs, a milestone in the art of the book, greater than any since Gutenberg's invention of movable type in the 1500s. No, 1456, wasn't it? 1456? Yeah, I think so. So it's his second book is not quite as successful. He took a trip up to Scotland and brought back pictures, and the book was named Sun Pictures in Scotland. His mother persuaded him. She was a powerful woman and had a lot of influence, and he was her only male child and the firstborn, and she wanted so for his financial and public success. So she persuaded him to take subscriptions to this. So he sold 100 copies, but they were never realized. He sold 100 subscription. Partly they had poor water. They couldn't keep the, the process would be varied. This is Sir Walter Scott, the author of Ivanhoe. This is his, he's a Scottish author. This is his tomb, and it's done with calotype. He also goes into business with this man who was his valet, Henneman. And this is a blatant ad after seeing the Super Bowl. Here, this is Henneman himself. He's photographing the Three Graces. This young man is printing calotype prints out in the sun. This guy's wearing his uniform and includes a top hat. This guy looks like Talbot, but it's not, because he's got more hair than Talbot. At least it's disputable. It's 2 images that are combined together right here. Look how huge these tripods are, because they don't crank up. He's actually straddling this one. Here you can see the head circle that this guy is getting his picture taken. And then another thing they can do is photograph flat copy, not just 3D copy. So it's an ad for all the services, but the water is poor in reading. This is the reading establishment, as the name of the business. And the business did not succeed because the images would be spotty or impermanent. And one of his last and most important patents was what he named the photoglyphic engraving. And it allows photographs to be printed. It's a precursor of photogravure and of the halftone. There's another example of that. And this is 1858. He's about stopped with photography. He gives up his patent in another lawsuit. He gives it up to the collodion process in 1852. So what's in a name? He liked being called Henry Talbot. Here was his first name for the process. It's a shadow drawing. This is the process we've described. Transfers, what he called negatives. Preserving process is what he called fixing. And then comes the calotype. His mother wanted him to name it the Talbot type. And then the last one that I just told you about. It would be wrong not to mention Herschel's influence. They are good friends. They meet when Talbot is 24 years old and are lifelong friends. Herschel is also noted as an inventor of photography, one of the 40. He gave us the name of photography. He introduced the concept of positive and negative in those names. Snapshot comes from Herschel, and so does the cyanotype process. And he had written about the role of hypo as a fixing agent in 1819, 20 years before the announcement. So then I want in the last few minutes here to look at some of the most distinguished and most remarkable, I think, work of Talbot. I just think that this is very visionary in 1841, 1842. And these are not my words. Graphic, bold, and nearly abstract comes from the Met off their website when they are looking at this image. It also looks like an Edward Steichen image from 1904, moonrise over the pond. And here in Oxford, look at the way Talbot is using this leading line around here and then echoing this space here in his positioning of the camera. Part of all of these little ghostly images are, again, probably people crossing the street. You know, you can sort of see this swoosh going by, but I think it's the composition and the sense of knowing and understanding how his art can work. He can't draw still, but he can take photographs, artful photographs. And, you know, he's cursed in a way of being in a kind of wet and cloudy England. And so on sunny days, he gets out and photographs, you know. And this haystack is beautifully designed as a house so that the rain will drop off of it, but wonderful. And then one of my favorite images by Talbot is the open door. It is full of symbolism of light leading you in. And you can see the lines of on the side of the image coating with the brush strokes of the sensitizing agent. He photographs it more than once. It's at the end of the day, kind of is the suggestion. The harness is off the horse. The circular broom is laid here. The worker is gone inside. But notice, look at the difference in shadows. He's photographed this more than once. So he knows that it's not just, you know, that one decisive moment. He is still working at making the composition. Here, he's used an entirely different broom and switched it to the other side. So he's studying the compositions. You can tell the troubles he has with negatives. This is the negative that made the one on the right-hand side. And these are part of my problem with looking on the internet. These are all different versions of the same image. How would we possibly know which one matches the original? We can go to the source image. This is one from MoMA, and trust that that one might be better than the one on Pinterest, which has stripped the color all away. But it is part of the problem of trying to find out about photo history on the internet. So this, on the other hand, is not that. This is Talbot studying the resolution and the different compositions, not resolution as we think of it in digital photography, but the different compositions and formulas for the chemicals that go in to see what colors he can bring about in his negatives. So these are all negative studies to see what the salt print will do. And here's a beautiful, beautiful image of a photo micrograph, and there's Talbot. Interestingly, he's done with photography by this point. He's 64 years old, and this is the collodion negative, which totally, except for modern day alternative process folks, has just about done away with the process of paper negatives, not at least as a commercial endeavor. So, but it still exists in alternative processes. And symbolically, instead of a book, as is so often used, he's shown holding a lens. Moffat is a Scottish photographer. So what about this polymath? Polymath meaning, you know, a person who has a learned person in many directions. Well, even politics. So he was elected to Parliament, served only a year. But look at this: mathematics, chemistry, astronomy, botany, philosophy, philology, Egyptology, the classics, art history. And he writes papers in almost all of those, 27 scholarly papers over his lifetime, and 4 books, not including the 2 that were the photographic books. Oh, I might have misspoken. I don't know. We'll have to look that up. Does that include the photographic books or not? He's friends with David Brewster and John Herschel, and they are great collaborators. And what does he give us? The negative process, which we use so much. He gives us half-toning and photo gravure. He had a stop-action picture done with flash in 1851 that the precursor to Harold Edgerton and others working at the first turn of the century. In 1835, he did something that was like the cliche there of drawing on a blackened piece of glass. This guy had a grand mind. He was truly a polymath. So what's in a name? These things. He may not have gotten the recognition he deserved during his lifetime. He was an interesting fellow. At 7 years old, he figured up how many miles he had traveled in his life. The number he approximated to be 2,717. At 8, he announced to his mother that he would like all of his writings kept, all of his letters. And so they did, and that's part of the reason we know the mind of Talbot. But look what we have named for him. In mathematics, there's Talbot's curve. In physics, there are 2 things that are named for him. In botany, 2 different species. The photogravure carries his name as well as that of Carl Klick. And in astronomy, there's the Talbot crater of the moon. And that's it right there. And how wonderful. Almost takes my breath. How wonderful to think that this is done with a Hasselblad camera on an image from film almost 100 years after his death. He died in 1877. So it's quite wonderful to see the image carried through with film. I don't know why I'm becoming so verklempt. So happy 221st birthday tomorrow. And thank you, Henry Talbot. So I think you may have some questions for me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that wonderful history there. I know myself, I learned a lot. We do have some questions coming in, but just as a reminder to everyone, if you do have a question for Rebecca, please go ahead and submit that using the chat function. If you're on our computer screen, there should be a chat icon at the bottom of the screen. If you're joining us by phone, you can click more and then chat. I do have a few already. First, through the examples that you showed us and of course talking about the 7 different types of photography that Talbot really kind of pioneered for us, you referenced the different exposure lengths. And for those of us living in modern times, there's been at least for my whole life, that kind of instant snapshot, even all the way through, Polaroids, right, where you're still getting kind of that quick turnaround prior to digital photography. Can you give us a bit of context of really how long those exposure lengths were for those early photographs?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, can I back up just a little bit to say how, because that's wonderful, how far we've come. In digital photography nowadays, it's not unusual to have a camera that can take an exposure of 1/8,000th of a second. That's 8,000 Mississippi before you can say Mississippi 1. That is just a modern miracle. And I like to use that for the 8 because the very first photograph in existence took at least 8 hours. And now they speculate that it took even more than that. And that wasn't a Talbot photograph, but it's the first one on metal done by Nicephore Niepce, who was Daguerre's partner. But exposure time for Talbot was when it was photogenic drawings, it could be anywhere 2 hours, depending on a bright day. And it could be anywhere as short as 30 minutes to 2 hours. Usually he didn't go out on those days that required that long. So when calotypes come in, it gets shortened to under a minute at times, but a minute wouldn't have been unusual for, again, depending on the day and depending on the subject. So there, you might have noticed, and I should have pointed out, in the picture of Henneman and his reading establishment, there's no shutter speed in those cameras. So they just take off the lens cap and go have a cup of tea in the days of the photogenic drawing. In the days of that process, the calotype, they are counting. And sometimes they'll pace around the room or outside, to count and then come back and cover it up. So it's still pretty slow. That's why portraits had head clamps, so that you wouldn't wiggle around.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Another question coming in. Are there any photographers that you feel that Talbot himself directly influenced, in your opinion?
Oh, yes. Well, in terms of the day there, I'm sure that he influenced both David Brewster and John Herschel, because they were in contact with one another all the time. And then he went to meetings of the Royal Society to continue the conversation with people. So unfortunately, some of his influences were about protecting his his patent and that sort of thing. But Claudet, was influenced by Talbot's style. And so actually was Julia Margaret Cameron, who was taught photography by John Herschel. And so again, the circle starts to widen. And so she's aware of Talbot's work, and her work is far more free and far more artistic and not very concerned with sharp images. In fact, people speculate that her lens was actually kind of cracked, that it was certainly too long for how close she would have subjects be. But what an imaginative mind. And so she was influenced by Talbot directly too, and others. Yeah.
Of course, of course. Well, and Julia Margaret Cameron was one of my, early history of photography favorites, in the dynamic scenes she would create.
She was not considered a very fine photographer during her day because her images weren't sharp. And there were other women photographers who got more notoriety. One of the Constance Talbot is often called the first woman to use a camera. And in fact, she was very supportive of Talbot's photography, but sorry, I'll get to this and get that next question. But there was a woman named Sarah Bright. I've always envied her name because it's so photographic, that she was probably the first woman photographer. And so she also knew of Talbot's work. Yeah.
Wonderful. So this one is coming in from Drusella. She says, I'm interested in the concept around and disputes around photography as something that captures truth and accuracy. When did people start utilizing lenses more intentionally to distort and or control the image?
Pretty quickly, actually. There was a lot of fibbing going on pretty quickly. One of the initial fibs, of course, about photography is the way that it shrinks. It's the great shrinking machine. So unless you have something to know the scale, by placing people or subjects in certain places in relation to the camera, or by using a certain lens, you can make your avocado look huge, or you can make it look very small, depending on the lens. And photographers realized that very, very quickly, that they could change the perspective and exaggerate one thing over another. And retouching happened really quickly. That the two spots on the door of the open door, I always want to get those out of there because they're just, they're just flaws in the negative, and I want to take a little Photoshop and fix them, and so there were problems like that they just would fix, on their bread and butter was the paying client for clients. And one of the biggest fakeries that happened was coloring. Hand coloring daguerreotypes, because color doesn't come in for a very long time. And so hand coloring daguerreotypes was much more successful than hand coloring calotypes. When a hand colored calotype looks more like a watercolor. But color was added, gold was added to buttons, rouge, cheeks and all that added very quickly, because it's kind of pasty looking in a way, gray looking, sallow.
A thought that comes to mind off of that was the practice of combining negatives, right? As a type of almost early Photoshop. Can you talk a little bit more about that process, or how that?
Sure. Well, one of the a California photographer did a really great thing with that, and that's Carlton Watkins. He made a shade that would block out some of the sky and on his camera so that it wouldn't get so overexposed. All the early processes were overly sensitive to blue. And so the sky would get, there are no clouds, you know, up there, and because it's so exposed. So he learned to darken, not let so much exposure go to the sky, and then to put clouds in. But the great you know, it was a Frenchman, Gustave Le Gray, who did that so beautifully. In fact, you can spot the same clouds appearing in different images just to make it seem, it wasn't to deceive so much as it was to try to get reality back, because they could see the cloud there, not that same cloud, but they could see the cloud and they wanted it to show up in the image, you know, to have clouds. So, and there were others. There was ghost photography came very quickly, you know, where you're a seance and getting a picture of your departed relative. Although it was much more common with daguerreotypes to have people hold a picture. So it was a picture within a picture. So you've lost a loved one, you hold their picture in the photograph, you know, and so it's that kind of internal reference.
Wonderful, thank you. Going back to Talbot's relationships, I know he did work with Herschel and other photographers. Did he mentor any of his contemporaries kind of specifically? Was he a teacher or more purely experimental and academic?
Well, Henneman, he definitely mentored. Henneman, Nicholas Henneman, was his valet, and he works with him and assists him so much, and Constance also assists him, but Henneman assists him. So he quit. He says, I'm not going to be your valet anymore. And he starts the business very much supported by the reading establishment. And I think lifelong, they travel together to Scotland. And that was an arduous thing to do. You know, the vagaries of the weather, the cumbersome equipment, just all of it was hard. It was really hard without Henneman, but Henneman's printing of the Pencil of Nature and the sun pictures, so he's mentoring him not only on the taking of the pictures, but also on the processing of the pictures. Yeah, I don't know another relationship that he had that was so strong. That's a very good question. I like it. I'll have to look into it.
Wonderful. Well, if there's any more questions, now's the time, guys, to write in. In the meantime, I do want to say thank you so much for logging on. And thank you, Rebecca. Coming up, I believe this weekend, the Viewpoint Gallery in Sacramento does have their 30-year legacy show is opening up. So on the screen is the web address for their website. Definitely go there to learn more information. If you want to follow up with Rebecca or have any other questions, her email address is also on the screen. Of course, please check out yoloarts.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at yoloartsca to stay up to date on everything that we are doing. We are, so grateful to have you guys back here for our first program of 2021. Next month coming up, we are going to have a panel on women in agriculture. So we're very much so looking forward to that. But thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you for your time. And I'm looking forward to checking out the show at Viewpoint.
Good. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.